Hello my friends, and welcome to this next video in the series where we shall be looking at more things about classes in JavaScript. So in the last video, we saw how to declare a class and even have a constructor inside of a class. So just like we're having it right here, we declare a class using the class keyword and then the class name, and then within that class we can have a constructor. And then we can create new objects just like we're having it right here, out of that human class, like this, and then we can store it inside of a variable. And then we can now use that variable name, the human one, to access the properties that exist for that human class. So we can say something like human1 dot human age. Whenever we create an object from a class, so like we have it right here, what happens is that the constructor gets executed automatically. That means that each time we create a new object, that is, each time we say something like new, and then like this, let me use a array. This right here is an object creation. And when we create an object like this constructor runs. And it runs and initializes properties on this object. And of course, I can store this in a variable. So let me say const human2 is equals this. And that is why you see for this human1, we can have unique values for those properties. So for human1, human name is Dominic. And for this same human1, the human age is 23. And for human2, human name and human age are Ebere and 24 respectively. We're able to do it this way because we have a constructor right here. And this constructor gets executed for each object that we create and then initializes properties on those objects. And then we can use the variable names having those objects to access the properties that exist for that object. So if you say human1.humanAge, we're going to get 23 printed on the console just like we're having right here. If we say human2.humanAge, we're going to get 24 instead. The truth is that we don't necessarily need to have our own constructors declared inside of a class like this. What happens is that when we create a class and we don't define the constructor by saying constructor like this, JavaScript actually puts a hidden constructor inside of our class. So if we don't really have anything to initialize, that is, if we don't have properties that we want to initialize for each object that gets created from that class, we might as well omit the constructor entirely. But what happens under the hood is that JavaScript puts a constructor right there for us, because each time we have a class, a constructor must be there, whether we're the one that writes out the constructor by ourselves, as we have here, or the one injected by JavaScript when we don't have any inside of the class. So for now, let me bring back the constructor we have right here and save this file. And of course, we're still getting 24 printed on the console because we are logging human2.humanAge to the console. And let me take this away. Now, we're going to talk about some of the important things that are peculiar to classes in JavaScript and indeed classes in other programming languages. There is something called an object-oriented programming, and it is all about creating a class and using your class to work in your code. But as we know in JavaScript, we don't necessarily need classes, right? We can just use functions to do just about anything we want to do. So JavaScript is a function-first programming language, unlike some other ones like Java. Somehow, just to show that JavaScript can also work with the object-oriented programming thing, classes were introduced to JavaScript. There is a body called ECMAScript, and ECMAScript is responsible for standardizing the JavaScript programming languages. So they are the ones that say how a particular thing works in JavaScript. So from ECMAScript 2015, JavaScript introduced classes to the language so we can work with classes. And so we can actually say that JavaScript is not actually a language that is strongly tied to classes, unlike some other ones. But then we get to use some of the object-oriented programming paradigm that is used in other programming languages. And object-oriented programming paradigm is actually something that has to do with creation of classes and working with classes, creating objects out of classes, and so on and so forth. And one of the things that concerns object-oriented programming language is something called inheritance. We're going to look at inheritance as it works in JavaScript. Inheritance simply means that a class can inherit properties or even functions from another class. How do I mean? Right here, let me create a new class called engineer. Now, right inside of this class, I'm going to write a constructor. So I'm going to say constructor. And then I want any object created from this class to have properties such as my job. I'm going to say my job will be equals job. And of course, we can receive job via the parameter right here. So let me say job. And in fact, let me say skill. And down here, I'm going to say this dot my skill is equals skill. And also, I'm going to have a function. I'm going to call this function what I do. This is just a normal function inside of the class. I want this function, the what I do function, to log something to the console each time it is called. So I'm going to say console.log. And then what do I want to log to the console? I'm going to start with the template literal. And then I want to say I can do and then concatenate my job. So I'm going to say dollars, parentheses, this dot my job. And I want to say something like my skill is, and then use dollars for the template literal. And then I'm going to say this dot my skill, like this. Actually, I want to put this on the next line so that we can see everything all at once. So I'm going to my view under the Visual Studio Code. You may not have it visible right here on my screen, but you can just click on view and then go to word wrap. So as soon as you click word wrap, it wraps down to the next line. Or if you're on your Mac, you can click on option Z and you're going to achieve the same thing. Maybe for Windows, it's going to be something like Ctrl Z, maybe. And then everything will come down to the next line. So let me click on Command Z, or rather option Z. And you see it comes down to the next line. So we can see everything all at once. So now I'm going to save this file. And of course, nothing will get logged onto our console, right? So what I want to do now is to create an object from this engineer class. So I'm going to store it in a variable that says engineer1 and set it equals to new engineer. Remember to always use the new keyword when creating your object, right? So I'm going to open the parentheses. And then within here, I'm going to provide arguments that will reflect these parameters right here. So for job, I'm going to say construction. And then for my skill, I can say losing screws. And then right here on the next line, I can do something like engineer1 dot what I do. And of course, call it as a function using the parentheses, right? And as soon as I save, you see that we get something logged onto the console. I can do construction. My skill is losing screws. So now, where does inheritance come in? We know that engineer, any engineer in real life, is a human being, right? So we want to also make this engineer a human being, okay? And that means we want it to inherit the properties or even functions that exist for human beings. And luckily for us, we have a human class right here. So we're going to inherit from this human class. So how do we do that? So I'll come to the engineer class, the class that wants to inherit from another class. And I'm going to use the keyword called extends. And which class is it going to extend? It's going to extend the human class like this. By writing this right here, it means that we can have access to the properties and to the functions that exist for the human class. Now, the next thing we're going to do is right inside of the constructor for the engineer class, we're going to use the super keyword. The super keyword just refers to the parent class, okay? So the parent class, as long as this engineer class is concerned, is human. That is the human class. And the child class is the engineer class. And it makes sense, right? Because this engineer class is inheriting from human. So in real life, a child can inherit from the parent, but the parent does not inherit from the child. So this engineer is a child class and the human class is a parent class. And that's why the engineer class is inheriting from the human class. Although we don't say inherit, rather we use extends. Okay? So now we're going to call super right here as the first thing within the constructor of the engineer class and open parentheses like this. So this super right here is a method and is a special method that is used to refer to the constructor of the parent class. So we're going to pass to this super constructor values for these names and age parameters. And so I'm going to say something like Dominic, comma, and then age, I'm going to say 23. Now, let's assume that I even want to pass another thing, another parameter for this human constructor. Let's say net worth. Well, now you guys will say I like to use net worth, but I mean, it's all a property. It's a type of property that a human can have, right? So I can say something like this dot, let me use my net worth is equals net worth, like this, okay? And so that means, of course, I'll have to come here now and give the net worth. So I'm going to say $100 billion. Or rather, it doesn't go to this constructor, my bad. So I'm going to take this away and then I'm going to call it for the super. So I hope you see how that works. Because remember, the super is referring to the constructor of the parent class, that is the human class. Now for this human class, let me give or declare a function right here. So I'm going to call the function bio. So bio will be a function that introduces the human. I want this bio class to log something to the console. So I want to say something like dollars, and of course open the parentheses. This dot human name is a great guy. And then I can say my age is this dot human age. And I can say my net worth is this dot my net worth, like so. So I'm going to save this. So let me show us what we have currently. This is a human class, and of course this is a constructor, right? And this human class has this bio function that will just introduce the human, right? And then we have this engineer class extending the human. And it also has its own constructor, but then it's calling super right here. And super is referring to the parent class. And to that parent class, we're passing this argument, Dominic, 23, and $100 billion. I remember when I said that child classes, just like this engineer class, inherit from the parent class, just like the human class. And what that means is it now has access to the properties and functions that exist for that parent class. And since we've already created an engineer object right here using the engineer class, we can have access to not only the properties and functions that exist for the engineer class, but also to the properties and functions that exist for the human class, because we use the extends keyword right here. So let me save this. And then now let me say something like engineer1.bio. Look closely, you can see that inside of this engineer class, we don't have any bio function, right? The bio function only exists for the human class, but then we're able to access it on the engineer object because the engineer class is extending the human class, all right? So as soon as I save this, you can see we have something like Dominic is a great guy. My age is 23. My net worth is $100 billion. And so that, my friends, is how inheritance works in JavaScript. We have a class, human class, and we have another one, the engineer class. And the engineer class is extending the human class. So the engineer class is a child and the human is the parent class. And instead of the constructor for the child class, we have the super right here, which is referring to the parent class. So we put all the arguments we need. And then after creating an object for the engineer class, we now store that object inside of the engineer1 variable. And we can now use that engineer1 variable to call all the functions and properties that exist for the engineer class and also the human class. How cool is that? So of course, we can even say engineer1 dot as soon as I say dot, you can see that the VS Code is even suggesting the properties or functions that we are able to access on this engineer1 object. All right. Of course, engineer1 is a variable, but then it's holding an object. So we can say human1 dot human age, and human age is a property, right? Let's check. Here is a property that exists for the human class. So, but when we save, of course, nothing gets logged to the console because we're not logging it yet to the console. So we can wrap this inside of a console statement. So I can say something like console.log. And as soon as I save, right here, we're getting 23. Because of course, we passed 23 right here. So that's inheritance for us. The next thing I want us to look at before we wrap up this video is encapsulation. So what is encapsulation? Encapsulation is just one of another object-oriented programming paradigm. And it is all about keeping your data safe and avoiding direct access or modification. So sometimes we have properties or even methods or functions inside of our class that we don't want outside code to modify or access directly. What do I mean? First of all, let me clean up some codes. So I'm going to delete this one. Let me take off the human pass, and we're just going to be left with the engineer class. And of course, there is no longer a human class. So I'm going to delete the extend human keyword, and I'm going to take the super method away. And then I'm just going to have this what I do function. Now, let me come down right here and create an object of this engineer class. So I'm going to say new engineer. And of course, let me start inside of a variable. So let me say const engineer1 is equals new engineer, like this. And let me provide job and skill. So let me say my job is construction and my skill is losing screws. Now, if I try to access any of these properties, that is my job or my skill properties that exist for this engineer class, and of course for this object, right? I can just easily say engineer1 dot my job. I can log it to the console, right? So I'm going to put this instead of a console statement. So I'm going to say console.log, and then I'm going to say engineer1 dot my job. So when I save now, you can see on our console, we have construction printed right there. And that means this my job property is not actually protected. We can actually have access to it. Now, if you want to have a property that you don't want direct access to, you can use encapsulation. So to do that, we can make that property a private property. So let me say I come down here and then I'm going to give a private property. We've not seen how to give a private property in JavaScript before, but this is how we do it. You can use the hash symbol and then you write the name of the property. So let me say the name of the property is my secret skill. So for this private property, you don't need to use this.mySkill. You can just directly write the hash symbol and then my secret skill. And so it will be seen as a private property. And inside of this constructor, we can initialize a value for this my secret skill. And I can say something like this dot, and you can see Visual Studio Code is suggesting hash symbol my secret skill. So I'm just going to choose that. Let me say building Titanic. So my secret skill is set to building Titanic. You can notice how I set the value of this my secret skill property. I did not receive it through parameter, although I could, which means that we can now give the value for that my secret skill. All right. So if I were to say something like SSK, for example, for the secret skill, it means right here, when creating an object from the engineer class, I'll have to give that secret skill. So let's say something like building a boat. Okay. I can do it like this, but I don't want to do it like this. So I just want to remove this one and then also remove this one. And let me take away this comma right here and save still. So my secret skill is building Titanic. So now if I want to access my secret skill, let me come here and say engineer1 dot my secret skill. You can see from the list of options that VS Code is suggesting to us, there is nothing like my secret skill. And that's because this engineer1 right here does not have access to my secret skill right here. We cannot access it via this engineer1 object. It is impossible to do that. And even if we try, so let me use the hash symbol again and say secret skill like this and save, we're going to get an error. And what's the error saying? It says cannot reference undeclared private names, secret skill. Now let me take this one away and save. We get undefined instead. So either way, we're not getting this secret skill, and that's because it is hidden from us. In order to get access to what the secret skill is, we can actually declare a function inside of the engineer class and make it such that we're able to access the secret skill. So what that means is that the private property that we have here, that is my secret skill, is accessible from within a function that exists inside of the class. And we cannot use the object created from that class to access that property. That's my secret skill property or the private property. Okay? We cannot directly access it, but we can use it within our method. So I can even come to this what I do function and say my secret skill is, and then I use the template literal, of course, and I'm going to say this dot my secret skill. All right. And if I'm to say engineer1 dot what I do and save, okay. Now we did not call this as a function, so it is giving us this back. So let's call it with a parenthesis and save. Now you can see my secret skill is building Titanic. All right. So the point to note here is that we can access this private property from within the function that exists inside of a class. And then we can use that private property within the function. And then when we call that function on the object, for example, here we're saying engineer1, the what I do, we're able to access it. We're able to print out our secret skill or my secret skill since it exists inside of the function here, the what I do function. So that means we can have special methods that can actually help us to set, or that is modify the secret skill, or that can actually help us to access the secret skill. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to provide two functions that can help us to access my secret skill and help us to modify or change my secret skill. So in order to do that, let me take away this console.log statement first of all and save. And then I'm going to declare two functions inside of the engineer class. So I'm going to say setting, just a normal function, but then we're going to be able to modify my secret skill inside of this function. So whenever we call this setting function, we're going to provide a parameter, which is going to be whatever skill that we want to be that secret skill. Okay. So you can accept it as a parameter. You can say next secret skill. And then within here, I'm going to say this dot, and then my secret skill is equals next secret skill. So you can see when we use this, we're always having this pound symbol or the hash symbol, however it is pronounced or called. And we're setting equals to the next secret skill, which is what we're going to be having from here. Okay. And then I'm going to provide another one called getting, another function. And then it's just to return the secret skill. So I'm going to say return this dot my secret skill. Now, after creating this engineer1 class, I can come down right here and say something like engineer1 dot getting. And as soon as I save, oh, we don't see anything logged onto the console. And that's because we're just returning this. Now we need to log this to the console. Okay. So let me take this and wrap it inside of a console statement. So I'm going to say console.log engineer1.getting. So as soon as I save, now you can see building Titanic has been printed right here, because of course that is what we've set my secret skill to. Now, what if we wanted to change this my secret skill? We can now use this setting method. So I can come down here and say engineer1.setting, and then I provide an argument that is going to be the updated value. So I'll come right here and give the value that will be the updated value for the secret skill property. So let me say I want to make it loosen nuts and bolts. Okay, so I want this one to become the secret skill instead. So after calling this right here on line 29, and we're trying to access the secret skill property using the getting method, because remember, the getting method returns my secret skill. But right here, we've been able to change that, right? So let me save. And as soon as we save, we'll get losing nuts and bolts. So you see that we're able to use two methods, the setting method and the getting method, or function. If you've heard me say method, it's because it is associated with a class, all right? So that's the proper name for it. The functions you have inside of a class is usually called a method, but they're nothing other than a function, all right? So this getting function or getting method returns my secret skill, and the setting method or function sets or updates the value of my secret skill. All right, and then we can now use this object to access or modify that my secret skill, which is a private property, as we like. So we cannot just directly modify my secret skill or directly access my secret skill. So that's what encapsulation is all about. It's about having strict access. It's about having strict access to the methods or functions or properties that exist for your class. So you do it in such a way that you have a controlled way to get access to that method or property, and you also have a way to update that property. And that's what encapsulation is all about. So that, my friends, that is the end for this video on classes. I just wanted us to talk about these two things about object-oriented programming in JavaScript, which are inheritance and encapsulation. See you in the next video. Please, my friends, like my videos and subscribe to my channel. It will go a long way in helping me to create videos like this.